As we discussed last week, the literature of the late 19th century was marked by a shift away from pre war Romanticism toward realism and naturalism. These movements, which focused on depicting the real America, continued into the early years of the 20th century with writers like Crane, Gilman, and Chopin. The new century, however, brought startling changes. The automobile and other technological advances changed the way that people interacted with each other, and a new view of art began to emerge in Europe: modernism. In 1913, the Armory Show, a vast show of modern European art held in New York, brought this new movement to America. At the time, it was dismissed as freak art and artistic anarchy. However, these new ideas that broke with tradition and upset the rules and standards of art and literature began to take hold in the minds of artists and writers in America as well as Europe. In 1914, World War I broke out. Although the US did not officially declare war for another 3 years, the stark realities of war once again began to shape the literature of the time. The traditions that had been upset by the new ideas of the Armory Show were shattered by a new modern form of warfare that had torn the world apart. Modernists were driven by the belief that the structure and safety once provided by religion, politics, and society were no longer enough. This belief intensified after World War I, when it seemed to many that history itself was coming to an end, and that modern life was horrific, chaotic, and ultimately futile. These writers truly thought that the world as they knew it was over, and they wanted a new way to view and express the world around them. They rejected the past and wished to distinguish themselves from virtually the entire history of art and literature. Some modernists expressed a deep sense of loss and despair. However, others responded with a fresh sense of both the freedom and the responsibilities of the artist in the new age. Many modernists shared an ambitious, aspirational belief in the role and place of the artist in contemporary life, believing that art had replaced religion in providing coherence, guidance, and insight into the human condition. To give you an idea of how the movements that we've been looked at are expressed in art, I've posted a selection of painting in your Week 2 modules that illustrate the changes. The modernist period also saw a radical experimentation in literary form and expression, such as a breakdown of standard forms and the adoption of a stream of consciousness technique. This experimentation was partly a response to the new forms of expression that were developing in painting, sculpture, and music, and to technological innovations such as the telephone and the cinema, which were changing the forms and the very meaning of communication. Ezra Pound's famous call to "make it new" is rightly considered one of the modernist mottos. Additionally, most modernists believe that literature should challenge and unsettle readers, and much modernist work is intentionally demanding and difficult. What all modernists share was a belief in literature's importance in the modern world and the need for it to be continually vital. While the pre-modernist world is characterized by a sense of order and stability rooted in meaningful nature of faith, collective social values, and a clear sense of identity, both personal and cultural, the modernist period is characterized by a sense of chaotic instability rooted in the revelation that collective social values are not particularly meaningful, leading to faithlessness, skepticism, and a confused sense of identity. Our first story for this week, A Rose for Emily, is one that's hard to categorize. It's at once a realist story focused on life in a small southern town, a gothic mystery about an antebellum family, and a more modernist story that eschews conventions of storytelling by moving through the narrative in a stream of consciousness mode that ignores the actual chronology of the story. This story is written by William Faulkner, who was born in Mississippi in 1897. While much of his early work is poetry, he became famous for his novels set in the American South, including The Sound and the Fury and Absalom, Absalom. Faulkner was awarded the 1949 Nobel Prize in Literature and ultimately won 2 Pulitzers and 2 National Book Awards before his death in 1962. In our next story, The Hunger Artist by Franz Kafka, the ideas of modernism are on full display in a text that is symbolic and abstract in its presentation of the titular character. I've posted a short video about Kafka in your modules if you want to know more about him and how his life affected his work. For our third story this week, we'll be moving away from the modernists to the postmodernists. This period after modernism was reacting not just to cultural and political changes, but specifically critiquing the modernist, which is why we refer to that period, and some argue the period we're still in, as postmodernism. The French theorist Jean-François Lyotard succinctly defined postmodernism as incredulity toward meta-narratives. That is, a skepticism towards the grand narratives that we use to explain the world around us, like good versus evil. Literary postmodernism reacted against the erasure of the past that the modernists argue for by intentionally referencing older stories and texts. They rejected the demand to elevate art by intentionally blurring the lines between high and low art. They played with the form of narration by using inconsistent tone, point of view, and chronology, and by having apparently random disruptions in the text. These works tend to be very aware of the fact that they're texts, even referencing it to their readers. If you've ever heard something described as meta, that's what they mean. A great example of this is from pop culture is the 90s teen slasher Scream. This film, which constantly references the previous slasher films that established the genre, is perhaps best known for the rules that one character lays out. These rules tell the viewer, with a nudge and a wink, that the movie knows what it is and how it works, and the audience gets to be in on the joke rather than being kept at arm's length. This knowingness and the way that the texts acknowledge their place in the literary canon is a key feature of postmodernism. Even though the writers most often associated with postmodernism may deal with serious themes, their work often has an absurd, playful, or comic aspect, and sometimes makes special use of parody and pastiche and of references to other texts and artifacts. The first of our postmodern writers, Flannery O'Connor, was born in Savannah, Georgia in 1925. O'Connor is considered one of the greatest short story writers of the 20th century. She faced some hardships growing up, losing her father as a teenager, but persisted in her studies. She eventually earned a master's degree and began publishing short fiction. Her work was informed by her experiences growing up as a Catholic in the South, and religion was to become a recurring theme in her work. This can be seen in her story for this week, A Good Man is Hard to Find. O'Connor's stories tend to be darkly comic, embracing the postmodern tendency to question the grand narratives of good and bad, right and wrong, that both society and religion teach. As you read, consider what changes in society these texts might be reflecting. We'll be looking at a few more postmodern authors next week that will show how this was a time not just for change, but also of expansion in the literary canon. As always, this week you have a discussion board post and a journal entry to complete. However, you also have your first writing project posted this week. This is not just a straightforward essay. Throughout the course, you'll have 3 different types of writing assignments, each covering a different selection of readings. The first type is a literary analysis. This is an essay where you make an argument about the underlying meaning or message of the text. The second will be a researched argument, where you'll be writing a persuasive essay about the text using research about the author, time period, or literary movement. The final one will be a creative project. You need to complete each of these 3 projects throughout the course, but you get to decide which type of paper to write for each of our 3 units: fiction, poetry, and drama. You can find the full details in your modules. I've also posted a few general writing guides. This is a writing intensive class. You will be graded not just on what you write, but how you write it. Please read everything carefully, including the chapters assigned from our textbook about writing. I have very specific requirements, and both of the argumentative essays should be written in formal academic audiences. That means no first person and no second person. Stick to the third person only. If you're not used to writing for an academic audience, please ask questions rather than just hoping that you'll guess right. You have 3 weeks to work on this essay, but don't leave it until the last minute. I'm requiring you to submit a draft of your writing projects to online tutoring for feedback. You'll need to do that next week so that you can spend the week after revising it. You can find that assignment in your week 2 module. This is a challenging essay and it will take some time to do well. So if you need me, you know what to do. Happy reading and writing this week.